The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, not truly stopped. Tony paused long enough for the Thames to exhale its damp breath over the rooftops of Northolt Wear. The air always tasted of wet wool machine oil and something faintly metallic like blood dried on brass. I remember the exact moment my fingers slipped. Not from fatigue, though God knows we'd been running on tea and tremors since the last raid, but from the sheer, stupid weight of routine. My name is Arthur Linley, and in the winter of 1940, I was a wireless operator. Grade 2. Stationed in a Nissen hut that groaned like a dying animal every time a gust came howling off the chimney. Outside, the blackout was absolute. Inside, the only light came from the dim amber glow of the TRF receiver, its dials smeared with fingerprints and condensation, humming that low, restless frequency 5.8 megahertz, the lifeline of convoy HG-73 inbound from Gibraltar. That night, the message came through at 0217 hours. Priority Alpha. Encrypted in naval cipher, No. 3, which we'd only just begun to trust since the capture of the U-110's codebooks. My ears were still ringing from the last scramble an hour earlier. We'd tracked a Heinkel formation veering toward the docks, but this was different. Short. Erden 6 groups of 5 letters, repeated twice for verification. I copied it down in pencil on the standard RAF Form 1032, my hand steady despite the ache in my knuckles from the cold. Then I ran it through the key of the day, the one issued under strict seal from HUD 8. The plain text emerged. Enemy bomber stream vector 215, altitude 18,000. Target bearings 5,130 N, 0007 WSDMA. I remember the silence that followed, not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that fills your skull when your blood stops moving. I could hear the tick of the wall clock, the hiss of the stove, the distant cough of a sentry in the mud outside. My throat tightened like a fist. I checked the decryption twice. Same result, same coordinates. I fed the message into the scrambler, keyed the transmitter, and sent it upstream to Fighter Command, then downlinked to the observer corps and the AA batteries along the Surrey line. Standard procedure. No hesitation, no room for doubt. But I'd made a mistake. Not in the cipher, not in the transmission. In the copying, when I'd transcribed the original Morse, my pencil had dragged a smudge, a slip of the wristband. I'd written 000, 7W instead of 017W. 7 minutes, not 17. A difference of 6 nautical miles, enough to shift the entire predicted impact zone from the heart of Westminster to an empty field just west of Epsom, where nothing stood but wind to wheat and a derelict barn. I didn't know it then. Not until dawn, when the all-clear finally sounded at 0442, I stumbled outside for air, my greatcoat soaked through, my boots sinking into the mire. The sky was the color of wet slate, streaked with smoke from the East End. But London stood, the spire of St. Paul's pierced the haze. Unbroken, over the wireless, the BBC played Land of Hope and Glory, and someone in the mess said, "They missed us. Bloody miracle." I said nothing. Back in the hut, I reviewed the logs, compared my Form 1032 to the original Morse strip. Saw it immediately. That smudged 0. The missing 10 minutes of longitude. My stomach turned to ice. I should have reported it. Protocol demanded it. But who admits to an error that worked? Who confesses to a blunder that spared thousands? The thought coiled in my chest like wire. If I'd been correct, the bombs would have fallen on Westminster. If I'd been wrong another way, they might have hit a hospital, a shelter, a school. But this accidental mercy felt less like salvation and more like theft. I'd stolen certainty from the war, replaced it with luck disguised as skill, and worse, I'd allowed everyone to believe the system had held, that the code was flawless, that I was reliable. For weeks, I waited for the reckoning. It never came. Instead, I was commended for timely and accurate transmission under duress. They gave me an extra ration of cigarettes. I smoked them one after another, tasting ash and guilt. By spring, I'd stopped sleeping without whiskey. The coordinates haunted me not as numbers, but asgos. I'd see 5,130 N, 0007, W etched in the condensation on my window, in the steam of my tea, in the grain of the plywood wall beside my cot. And always, beneath it, the unspoken question, was it mercy or cowardis? Because the truth is, in that half-second, when I read the decrypted message, when my finger hovered over the transmit key, a part of me wished it were wrong. Not because I doubted my work, but because I feared what I might have to live with if I were right. So when the error revealed itself, I didn't correct it. I let the lie breathe. I let the city celebrate its reprieve, and I buried the truth where no one could find it, not even me. Until now, the war ended, but the coordinates didn't. They followed me into Civvy Street, like a draft through a cracked door present in every quiet moment, every glance. At a map, every time I heard a child laugh. Near a railway station and flinched, half expecting the wail of a siren. I took a job with the GPO, stringing telephone lines across the Midlands. Thinking distance and routine might bleach the memory, but memory isn't paint. It's bone, and bone doesn't fade. In 1947, I married Eleanor. She'd been a wren in Portsmouth, calm as tide-washed stone, with hands that could mend a radio valve blindfolded. She never asked about the nightmares. Not outright, but sometimes, when I'd wake gasping at 3 a.m., she'd place a cup of cold tea on the bedside table and say, "You were talking in numbers again." I'd nod, sip, and pretend it was just static in the mind. Once, she found my old code book hidden in a biscuit tin beneath the floorboards. She didn't open it, just wrapped it in oilcloth and buried it in the garden. That was her kindness. She knew some errors aren't meant to be corrected, only contained. For 20 years, I believed I'd succeeded. The lie had hardened into a shell, and I lived inside it, dry and safe. Then, in 1965, the Public Record Office declassified a batch of Coastal Command intercepts. I read about it in the Times over breakfast tea gone cold toast, untouched. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. But my vision blurred on the fourth paragraph. A critical misreading of longitude in a priority alpha. Transmission on the 16th of November 1940 resulted in defensive assets being redirected to a false impact zone. Fortunately, the actual raid targeted industrial sectors in Croydon, sparing central London. They'd called it a misreading. Not a smudged zero. Not a tired hand. Not a man who'd blinked at the wrong second. Just misreading, as if the war had been a book, and someone had skipped a line. I went to the British Library the next day, requested the file, sat in a carrel, beneath a buzzing fluorescent tube, the smell of paper dust and old ink thick in my throat. There it was. My Form 1032. Photocopied, stamped secret, now declassified. My handwriting unmistakable, the 0 bloated, the 7 leaning like a drunk. Beside it, a typed analysis. Transmission error likely due to operator fatigue. No disciplinary action taken, as outcome was operationally favorable. Operationally favorable. The phrase sat in my gut like shrapnel. They'd weighed lives against protocol, and found the arithmetic acceptable. But today, Adinti asked whether the man who made the error could live with the sum. That evening, I walked to Epsom, took the train, then a bus, then walked the last 3 miles, through fields that hadn't changed much. The barn was gone, replaced by a housing estate with neat hedges and children's bicycles chained to lampposts. I stood where the bombs had fallen. Craters long filled, grass smoother skinned. No plaque, no marker, just a swing set creaking in the wind, and the distant chime of an ice cream van. I thought I'd feel absolution, or rage, or something clean. Instead, I felt only the weight of the silence I'd carried for 25 years. The silence of not confessing. The silence of being praised for a miracle I'd bunged. The silence of knowing that, had I been right, the abbey might be rubble, the cabinet scattered, and I'd be hailed as a hero, mourned as a casualty. But because I was wrong, I lived with the quiet shame of a salvation I didn't earn. Eleanor died in 78. Cancer. In her final weeks, she held my hand and whispered, "You were always kinder than you thought." I didn't tell her. Not then, not ever. Some burdens aren't shared. They're absorbed, like rain, into stone. Now, at 83, I sit in this cottage in Dorset, the sea groaning beyond the dunes, and I write this not as confession, but as correction. Not for the record, God knows. The record doesn't care but for the ghost of the man I was in that Nissen hut. Penicillin and heart pounding like a faulty oscillator. He didn't mean to save a city. He meant only to do his duty, and in failing, he succeeded in a way that hollowed him out. I still dream of the coordinates, but lately they've begun to shift. Sometimes it's 07W, sometimes 017W, sometimes neither. The war, I've come to understand, doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It ends when the last man who carried its secrets stops hearing them in the static between heartbeats. And I'm still listening.